REBA has recently released our third annual financial wellbeing research report in association with Wealth at Work. This year's findings explore retirement adequacy, the broader societal and economic issues impacting wellbeing offerings, and the growing financial risk to employees. If you'd like a copy of this report, which is stacked full of insights and relevant data, you'll find a link at the end of this video or head to our website, reba.global. To discuss the findings with me today, I'm delighted to be joined by Jonathan Watts-Ley, Director, Wealth at Work. We're going to talk about how employers are responding to employees' needs in their approach to financial wellbeing and what their focus could be for the future. While you're watching this video, if you'd like to jump ahead to a specific topic in our discussion, you can see the chapters on screen or click the video timeline below. Jonathan, our findings showed that employers are moving from a tactical to a more strategic approach to financial well-being, with 58% having made changes to their financial well-being offerings and 49% planning to in the next 2 years. What's driving this change?
Yeah, I think really financial well-being is come to the forefront in the last few years. I think it was always really the kind of poor cousin to the other well-being pillars. So when you looked at physical health and mental health and well-being, there was a lot more if you like strategic structure within the workplace. Whereas financial well-being was often a bit of an afterthought. I guess back in the days, companies would have a pension, which clearly is financial. But actually, once you got beyond that, a lot of the financial benefits and how they would join together often were quite limited. But I think it did come to the forefront really as a result of COVID and then the cost of living crisis, where all of a sudden organizations were dealing with the issues around people effectively not being able to afford to meet their weekly or monthly budgets. And we had a backdrop, I think, of where inflation was running ahead of pay rises. So even though employers were giving pay rises, people were still feeling worse off. So I think that focused the mind for a lot of those employers. So it is really pleasing to see that now they see it as a strategic cornerstone of their well-being strategy. And it's good to see that more organizations are not only looking at it in a more strategic way, but are actually looking to spend more money on it. And to make sure that the programs that they put in place are targeted to the various segments within their workforce.
What are those barriers to accessing support that might have existed in the past or currently exist that employers are looking to focus on?
Yeah, I think a lot of the barriers were actually around often communication and the way that these things get communicated or don't, as the case may be. It's quite interesting that the research picked up that the employees often aren't sure where to go or what's available. And actually, we've done other research with employees separately to the REBA research a few months ago, and that told a very similar story in that there was still a lot of employees who were saying, well, I'll still go and talk to my friends and family or my friends down the pub. And whilst that's great to a certain extent, clearly by its very nature, it's quite tactical. There's nothing really strategic about that. And also, of course, if you go into your friends and family, whilst there will be good intent, you don't know whether the information they're giving you is actually the right information or perhaps the best information that they could give you. So I think actually creating more of what we often refer to as push and pull strategies within the workplace is really, really important. So what are the things that the employer wants to push out? What are the things that they want to make sure that their employees are aware of from a financial well-being perspective? But then also the pull strategies. So when you think about things like debt, of course, the employer isn't going to know what levels of debt any individual may have within the organization. But it's really important to ensure that the employees understand that there is support available for particularly when people are getting into quite serious debt.
And although the increased cost of living remains the largest driver of change, our research found this was actually a decreasing issue, which might come as a surprise. So in the past 2 years, 80% of employees felt this was a driver of change for financial wellbeing offerings. However, in the next 2 years, this falls to just over half at 53%. And we're seeing ESG, aging population, and in the increased cost of private healthcare having an impact on financial wellbeing offers. Could you explain the reasons behind this shift?
Yeah, so I think there's a general view that that what's happened now is there's been a flip of what I mentioned before. So now wage inflation is running ahead of CPI, of general inflation. So therefore, if all things are equal, then people should theoretically be better off. Um, However, we do know that there is still pain there, because if you look at things like the mortgage market, then we know that a lot of people are still to renew fixed rates, and they will still be going to higher rates. So even though we might have seen in recent weeks that some of those mortgage rates have actually come down, for those individuals it will still actually be an increase on what they've had previously. So the people will still find it potentially quite tight. And then of course we've still got other inflationary measures that we know are coming in. So we know that the energy cap is going up. We know rentals are up quite significantly as well. So clearly it will affect different people in different ways, and we often talk about, it's, you have to understand your own personal inflation rate, because it is very different for different people depending on your situation, and whether you're renting or you've got a mortgage, or many other aspects in terms of level of income, and therefore what can be covered by the basics. So I think that's the reason that there feels as though there's going to be some easing, but I think the easing is kind of a generalization, and it won't apply to everyone.
And this year's research found a significant jump in the number of employers concerned about employees unable to retire, with 71% highlighting insufficient pension savings for retirement as a risk. As a result, we're seeing employer funded pre retirement planning, coaching, and training is the fastest growing financial wellbeing offer. What are the burning issues when it comes to retirement adequacy, and where should employers be focusing their efforts?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting one, because there's a couple of big sort of structural shifts that are going on. So the first one is, of course, there is an aging population. So potentially you've got up to a million people potentially retiring every year over the next few years. But of course, whether they do retire or don't retire will be dependent to a certain extent on financially whether they think they can afford to do that. So that large number of people theoretically being able to retire creates not only a question for the individual in terms of can they afford to, but also creates a question for the employer. Certainly, we work with employers where some say, well, actually, we don't mind having an older workforce because it means we can retain certain skills, and it actually fits well with us. Whereas other employers are saying, well, actually, because of the type of work, that's not really a sustainable solution. So again, can't really generalize, because I think from the employer perspective, it will depend on what the work is. Um, but I think the other structural thing that's happening is that we've got a group of people that are in their 40s, will be moving into their 50s, who are the group of people that, if you like, were too late for final salary, but were too early for auto enrollment. And what that means is there's a group of people now that will be coming up to retirement over the next 10, 15 years, where potentially they've got very, very low pension pots, because actually they didn't pay into a DC pot in their early years in the workforce. And as I say, AE came in sort of a bit too late for them to start from day one. So it is quite interesting that we will be seeing that dip, if you like, from people, a lot of people having final salary to people actually having no final salary and actually quite poor DC. And then the generation after it will pick up again, because a lot of those people would have paid into auto enrollment from the first day of being in the workforce. Albeit, there is still an argument that what those people save is not enough.
What can employers do for that critical generation of employees, you say, who were caught in between auto enrollment and final salary? What more can they do to support them?
Yeah, so I think one of the big questions is understanding what pot they have, what that pot is forecast to give them in 15 years, 20 years, whatever it might be. And does that meet, at today's prices, does that meet their requirements? Because clearly people have choices about, well, they could pay more money into their pension, and therefore over the next few years they if you like, they make up that gap. But of course we still know that even though there is some easing of the cost of living crisis, that saying to people, we'll just pay more money in, is very easy to say, but often quite difficult to do.
As important as all of this good work is, if you can't measure your financial well-being data, then it's really hard to prove a return on investment. And in the next 2 years, we've seen from the research there'll be an incredible shift and increase in measuring the effectiveness of financial wellbeing benefits. How can employers better utilize the data they're collecting to create better outcomes for employees and the organization itself?
Yeah, I think there's a number of ways of doing this. So one of the most obvious ways, I guess, is looking at benefit take up. So if you have an intervention, let's say you run a webinar on one of the financial benefits that are on offer, then clearly you can look afterwards and say, is that encouraged take up? So I think there's some sort of very black and white things like that. I think there are less black and white areas. So when you start looking at productivity, when you look at things like absenteeism, clearly we know through some of the academic research that if people have financial worries, that often leads to lower productivity and absenteeism, and it can lead into other well-being issues like mental health issues as well. But clearly measuring that within your organization is much longer term, and you have to be pretty clear about cause and effect. So it is something worth looking at, but it's clearly not as easy as measuring benefit take up.
There is plenty to discuss, and we have just scratched the surface really on the fantastic insights found within our latest financial wellbeing research. Jonathan, thank you for joining me today. Your insights have been invaluable. If you would like a copy of the research, we have included a link at the end of the video for you to access. Thank you very much for joining us.